how do I motivate my team? And I'm going to bet that you believe that money is one of the primary drivers. So not to discredit money, but it isn't the driver, and it doesn't sustain you through the middle of the year when things are not going so very well.
Many people are really motivated by like purpose, meaning, impact. There are very few who get out of bed and say like, today I'm going to increase the return on invested capital of my company by like a 0.5 percentage point. The same level of involvement or even more than a micromanager, but not to control, but to actually support the empowerment. We have really powerful and healthy social relations and social interactions within an organization. That's very motivating. You know, go into work and it's like, my team and we're working on this.
One of the things about purpose is there is no growth in comfort and no comfort in growth. Yet the big leaps are how careers are made and how businesses excel. So how do you master not knowing at all or feeling like an imposter? How do you have the conversations that lead to trust and, of course, excellence? How do you take charge of the things that you can control? How do you thrive outside your comfort zone? That's what this podcast is about. I'm your host, Wanda Wallace, and it's time to get out of your comfort zone. Welcome to the conversation. So if you're like most of the managers I'm dealing with, you've probably been thinking about how to better motivate your team. In fact, that's what most of my coaching clients say to me, how do I motivate my team? And I'm going to bet that you believe that money is one of the primary drivers. And in some industries, you will be adamant about that. In other industries, you'll be less adamant about it. But that money is what's going to drive engagement and performance. That was a very clear strategy, usually is what people go to. And you're probably wondering how you make work a little bit more human, or should you even try to do so? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I think you're going to find it's a lively discussion about what truly motivates people at work and why employees are ultimately the quote-unquote new customer. So my guest today is Stephan Meier. He's one of the world's leading experts at the intersection of behavioral economics, corporate strategy, and the future of work, which makes him well suited for today's discussion. He's currently the James P. Gorman Professor of Business Strategy and the chair of the Management Division at Columbia Business School here in New York. And he's the author of a book we're talking about today, The Employee Advantage, How Putting Workers First Helps Business Thrive. Now, I should say, he's an award-winning teacher at Columbia. Every year, hundreds of students listen to him about the human side of strategy of all things, both in the MBA program and in the executive education program at Columbia. So, Stephan, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Wanda, for having me. I'm very much looking forward to that.
So am I. I have been trying in the last, months to get more and more people on to talk about motivation, because I find that this whole thing about human motivation is just, first off, the literature is an absolute mess trying to make sense of it. And managers are constantly, how do I motivate? How do I motivate? So I think this is fascinating. But before we dive into that one, I need to know why. You're an economist by training. So what gets you to shift to this employee human side future of work as an economist?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, there are economists with a heart around. There are actually a lot of them. But it's a very good question because, the models that economists write down and optimize and whatever have this very weird view of what a human being looks like and how he or she acts. Is this supercomputer almost, who optimally maximizes, is very rational and makes decisions that are mainly in their self-interest. And so behavioral economics, which I study for a while, relaxes those assumptions. And, from introspection, I know I'm definitely not a rational supercomputer who doesn't make any mistakes. Quite the opposite. I make a lot of systematic mistakes. I hardly ever learn from them, makes the mistake over again. And also want to believe about myself that that I'm not just self-interested. But when I go into the classroom for many, many years, I teach business strategy. I was like, how can a company make more money? How can Walmart position themselves better? How does Disney need to deal with streaming or not? And in that view, I was always teaching a lot about positioning, the customer, how to make those rational decisions. And then I would go to my office and study human motivation. And then I would go to the classroom and I'm like, think about the customer and optimizing. And And only during the pandemic, quite frankly, I made kind of this connection that, there are humans everywhere in an organizations. There are human decision makers, the executive, the managers, and so on and so forth. There is the customer, obviously, and there are the employees, the people who actually do the work. And so I combined those two in the pandemic, where I thought like this health crisis really put like a bright spotlight on stuff that is not working well in the workplace. It wasn't working well before, but we kind of realized then as like, oh, for years we thought like you can never work remotely. Well, actually you can. People were thinking like, is this all I want to get out of my life? So like the Great Resignation and so on, and somehow motivation then became on top of managers' mind. And so then I started to combine kind of my research on human motivation, thinking about strategy, and I was also starting to teach an elective on the future of work, where I think, in this discussions we're having all the time about technology in general and AI in particular, we over-indexed on technology. There's a lot about what can the technology do, and it's an important discussion. But I think we underemphasized a little bit that there is humans involved. When we talk human-machine interaction, there is the human part. And so I really love to talk about what I say is like, the oldest processor in the world, which is the human brain, and thinking about, how do we actually tick? What gets us up in the morning? Why are we engaged or not? What motivates us? And then also, what does technology do with that motivation? How can it help or more often, unfortunately, also destroy? And how can we be careful about that? So that's kind of I wouldn't say it's a shift, but it's this transition from like starting out being really an economist and thinking about psychology, and then moving into kind of how that affects business strategy and organizations as a result.
It makes a lot of sense to me. I feel it not as a shift so much as an integration, two pieces that you hadn't brought together. But in my mind, dealing with human decision makers every single day, it makes a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a little embarrassing, that I have to say, well, and I figured it out during the pandemic. We're like, many people figured that out for a long time before. Now, I do actually think that humans and employees are becoming more important, and if not less. So I feel also there is this pivotal moment where our HR practices or people matter are actually becoming more important going forward than they were always important. Obviously, always had to deal with employees, and the workforce was always a very important part in how to run a business and be successful in it. But I do think it's actually becoming more important. Similar to that, the customer became more important, over the last maybe 1 or 2 decades. That led to customer centricity, and I believe kind of the employee centricity is next.
That's right. Employee centricity. I think it's an interesting story, and we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that one in a moment. But my comment is suddenly I think the balance is shifted in favor of employees. We have a younger generation in the workforce that is now in most companies the majority of the workforce, like it or not. They have a different set of expectations and demands. And there are so many of them that they are going to win. And it is a strong market. So if they're not happy in your company, they can leave and go someplace else. And until those dynamics all shift, they're going to drive us to think differently. And I actually think we're going to be better off for it at the end of the day. But I agree with you. It's this thinking about the employee as sort of a driver of the business and putting them heart and center is a very interesting moment in time. All right. I can say many things about that. Let's shift to talk about motivation. Straight up, first up question, what motivates people in your opinion and in your experience? I want both research and experience weighing in here.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you started out in the introduction, mentioning money, which is indeed, if you ask managers or if you look at kind of how many organizations use money as this carrot and stick. It's a very prevalent view that, what actually makes us tick is money. And money is obviously important. There is no way around that. People need money.
Want more of it,
they
yeah.
need a wage. You can buy nice things if you earn more money. And especially on the lower end of the income distribution, money is critically important also for productivity. If you're not financially secure, and then if you have to think every single day how to make ends meet, you can't be productive or to your fullest potential. So they are obviously increasing wages and making sure that everybody is financially secure is very, very important. But it kind of stops there. I think the evidence is pretty clear that money is just not everything that there is, and often not even the most important motivator. If you look at correlation between pay and job satisfaction, for example, it's extremely weak. It's not like, you make more and you love your job more, because there are other aspects. Or if you look at people who switch jobs, and I often, as you said, Wanda, I often hear my executives say well, they jump ship just for the money. Everybody, they're not loyal anymore. They want to go for $2,000 and then you switch the job. It's just not empirically true. Most people actually switch for other reasons and find another job. And then the other one is when you think about people who get unemployed, for example, a big part of unemployment is obviously you don't make as much money. Now, there are studies who look at, you lose your job and you still have about the same amount through some unemployment insurance and some other means. People are miserable. They're not thinking, oh, this is fun, I don't have to work and still make money, because they're losing something very critical that comes with a job and being active and having that identity. So I just don't think that the evidence supports that money is the main motivator to get an engaged and productive workplace. Now, if it's super shitty job, and it's really, there is nothing else that gets you motivated, you need to be compensated. But if you actually have a job and tasks and a group, a team that is motivating, people are not then getting out of bed because they're oh, the money. It's they're getting out of bed because they're doing something really interesting in an interesting environment.
Right. All right, I have two comments about this on the money. One is, yes, when people do exit interviews and they've gone to another job, they will say to the HR partner who is interviewing them, yes, I'm leaving for the money. And yes, you get more money by moving to another company. Okay, at least initially, not necessarily long-term, but initially you do. The problem is what got them to take the headhunter call in the first place is not the money. It's a whole litany of other factors, which they don't want to tell you on exit interview because they may need to come back at some particular day. So they're not going to tell you I had a lousy job, or my manager was awful, or my teammates were mean, or I don't believe your values, or whatever. What's the safe answer? I'm moving for the money. So we listen to those interviews and assume that that's a driver, and I don't think it is.
Absolutely.
So, and who doesn't love getting a boost in your salary or in your bonus, beginning of the year, it kind of makes you feel good. My question for people is, how long does it make you feel good?
You get
not long.
Yeah, you get used very fast to now you have $5,000 more or whatever. You don't get used to the work environment is miserable every single day that you go into there. That's you don't forget about that because you get reminded every single day. Well, the paycheck, it's good, ego boost. And maybe you can buy, you can fly first class instead of economy. But, how long does that last? You get used very fast to that one.
Well, and let's also, as you rightly said, let's recognize that there are differences in the income distribution. If I can't pay the rent and I'm really struggling for food or the rent or the whatever, a little more money does make a big difference. But even that doesn't compensate for the fact that I'm going to work with a miserable group of people in a miserable job every day. So not to discredit money, but it isn't the driver, and it doesn't sustain you through the middle of the year when things are not going so very well. All right, so we've killed that one. Then what is it that does motivate people?
Well, so I think like the evidence is clear, and in the book I really try to lay out kind of 4 motivators that are important and that the evidence shows is really the one that makes people engaged and productive, and then ways managers can actually use those motivators to humanize work or make it more engaging and more powerful. So the first one, in no particular order, because like you can't trade them off, you kind of need all of those, is purpose, or I call it shoot for the moon. After the story of like when President Kennedy, said like NASA, the only mission we have is to bring a man to the moon in 7 years. That was before they were actually able to, they only had a man in orbit for like a couple of seconds, far away from landing on the moon, which is the easy part, but getting back from the moon. But somehow that motivated that organization. Many people are really motivated by like purpose, meaning, impact. There are very few who get out of bed and say like, today I'm going to increase the return on invested capital of my company by like a 0.5 percentage point. They get out of bed and like solving difficult, socially relevant problems. And I think that's a very important motivator, and research just shows that very clearly, that this purpose is very important. Now, organizations can now actually harness their organization. First they need to know what their why really is, and which is not so easy. Many have like mission statements, but most of them, or maybe all of them have, but most of them are kind of empty. They have no real implication. If your mission is like to make the world a better place, that's just not cutting it. It has to be much more concrete, and you actually need to live it. And then make sure that everybody in the organization, feels in their activity that they're part of that, which is not so easy because sometimes you're not actually, making whatever the mission is. But it needs to go, and going back to NASA, that famous quote where like that janitor said, I'm not mopping the floor, I'm bringing a man to the moon, so that everybody in the organization knows and feels and can express in their own words what is actually the mission, the purpose of the organization. So that's one. The second is autonomy. I call it a matter of trust because it kind of needs trust to create autonomy, empowering people to have, discretion, making their own choices, and people are extremely motivated by that. Some actually leave organization, become self-employed to be their own boss, despite the fact that we know that self-employment normally has a lower pay than if you actually work in an organization. But even within organization, being empowered is a very important part. And as I said, the other part which makes that so powerful is the trust aspect. So I trust you to make the right decisions. So managers should definitely avoid being the micromanager. And a micromanager is one that is constantly involved in order to control. Now, the problem with then moving to autonomy is that a lot of leaders then scale back on involvement as well. But I think that just doesn't work. What you need to be is like more, the same level of involvement or even more than a micromanager, but not to control, but to actually support the empowerment. And that, what I call like engaged coach, like very frequently engaged, giving feedback, making sure that the teams who make their autonomous decisions are really up to speed. The technology sometimes helps a lot in those decisions. So there is an interesting home health care provider in the Netherlands, Bertzorg. They're extremely successful, have much lower cost and much higher satisfaction of the patient, so the outcomes is much better. And they do that by providing almost full autonomy to like 12-person teams. They can make all their choices themselves, and to hiring, what they do with the patient, and so on and so forth. But the important part is a very powerful IT system in the background that gives constant feedback on what they're doing, what other teams are doing, and not to control, but in actually provide the right information for the teams to make the right decisions, to learn when something went wrong and get those feedback. So I think technology can really help there. So autonomy is number 2. The third one is competence. I call it just right tasks. People are extremely motivated when they have tasks that really fit their skills. We all know you work on something and you're kind of overqualified. You're not using all the skills you have. You're bored. In fact, a lot of people leave because they're stuck. And but the flip side is also, if you work on something too hard, or you're not properly trained and you always struggle, that's also extremely demotivating. So what is really motivating is if you have those just right tasks, just right for your skills, and then you constantly learn. Now that is not so easy to actually achieve for managers. I sometimes jokingly tell my executives, it's like, okay, now you just have to, for all your team members, figure out what's their just right task, match it to the task, and constantly update. Once they learn, something and master it, you have to give them something new. And they all look at me as if I have 7 heads. And then I think wow, Stephan, that's really hard. And it is. But it sounds a little bit like an AI task. What AI does, think Netflix. What Netflix does is figures out, Wanda, she always watches, I'm now making stuff up, nature document. She loves nature documentary shows. So let's show Wanda more nature documentary shows. Stephan, he watches sports documentaries, whatever, or sports. Let's show him sports shows. Now, after a while, I'm bored about the sports and you're bored about the nature documentaries, and you start to watch dramas. Now, Netflix, then the algorithms are oh, wait a second. She's watching something else. Let's show her something else. And so this personalization is what those algorithms are really good at. And so technology can now be used by managers to actually do exactly that. So internal marketplaces, technology solutions within organizations do that, where the employee says I want to learn something new. I want to be on another project. And then it matches it to projects within the organization, constantly learns that I now have a new skill. And in doing so, is much better in providing just right tasks. Organizations like MasterCard or MetLife or Novartis and whatever, they're all now using those technology solutions to provide those just right tasks. So number 3 is those just right tasks and competence. And 4 is relatedness, or I call it working together works. And it has 2 sides. We all know if you work in an amazing team, you have really powerful and healthy social relations and social interactions within an organization. That's very motivating. Go into work and it's my team and we're working on this. Obviously, the flip side is toxic work cultures where the relationships are not healthy at all. That's extremely demotivating as well. Now, those healthy and good social relationships, they're not just coming like that. You have to actually be, and managers, team leaders have to be very intentional in creating those and being on top of mind to actually create the right, first of all, that the right people meet each other. Those, the water cooler moments. We're kind of hoping that the water cooler or kombucha tap moments are happening. We can be much more deliberate about this, but we can also be much more deliberate about those social interactions. So there is a study in Turkey that put managers into a leadership program where they learned, a lot of it, social interaction has to do with language as well, and open, how am I taking feedback or not? So they trained those managers in like having the right language, being open about feedback as well. And then they tracked what those managers who went through the training compared to those who did not, had huge impact. So like the proportion of employees who claimed that they're not supported, dropped 40%. The ones who actually wanted to come back to the office increased 6 percentage points, because people don't want to go to the office often because it sucks. There's less microaggressions on Zoom than in the office. But if you actually create this very powerful social interactions, that's why you want to hang out with other people and do the best work. So it's purpose, autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So those are kind of the four that I think are really important for people.
Or they're really big motivators. It's interesting. I think the others all matter, but I think the relatedness is such a central component to this one. And we say the words, but we don't often understand the depth of it. So if I go back to my beginning statement about a person who decides that they're fed up with this company and they're ready to leave, okay? They may feel that they don't have a huge amount of autonomy, but if they've got the right relationships, they can work their way through it. If they feel that they're valued as a person and connected with people. We know jobs like in call centers, people stay in a job that's a difficult job because people are yelling at you all day long. You stay because of the connection you have in the small teams, and the best call centers know that that's how you make a call center profitable. And if I have the right relationships in the right centers, I'm going to find opportunities that let me use my competence in a better way. What I think you're highlighting, though, is the need to be more intentional about driving each of these.
Absolutely, Wanda. I think being intentional about this is all that matters. We're often, not so surprising, being, whether you're a leader of like a 3-person team or like the CEO of a multinational organization, it's a hard job. There is so many things that are going on, and often we don't have the time to be that intentional, especially maybe about those social relationships, where we think, I'm kind of a nice guy, and I think we're like a good team, but we can do all much, much better. What I think is so powerful, what you also said, there's evidence who backs that up. So if you look at, there's this saying, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers, which is just absolutely true. And if you measure it, it looks like if you're a manager who is like in the top 10% of management skills, it's as powerful as adding one extra person to a 9-person team.
Oh, wow. I love that. Hold on. Top 10% of management skills.
Yes.
It's as effective as adding another person
to a 9-person team. And then the question is like, what makes somebody top 10%? Now, it turns out in those studies, they actually then look, and social skills, social relationships is the key driver. It's not that the top manager is like a good salesperson, or like, it's actually those relatedness that you mentioned that drive all of this. And that's something that we can actually also train and learn. It's also not like, you're just born a jerk or not. No, you can actually get better. You can learn empathy. You can learn social skills. And as I mentioned before, language is often a big part. Understanding what your team members want and need. Those social relationships, what I sometimes say, there is old school low-tech personalization. And what it is one-on-one meetings. Is actually to talk to somebody and then figure out, Wanda, she has that's what she is not so happy about right now. That's what she needs. That's what she inspires. And then I can actually tailor the experience of you somehow differently than somebody else in my team. But it needs to go to you intentionally back. It needs taking the time, being very intentional about those social relationships, and then optimize accordingly.
Stephan, you're speaking my language, of course, because I believe that everything interesting that happens inside an organization ultimately revolves around a conversation of some form or another. Even the human-machine interface involves a conversation. Like, you can't get away from the conversation. Improving the quality of the conversation is ultimately how you improve results. You improve engagement. And you just told me I improve productivity in a dramatic way. I think it's great. And it can be learned. So, at any rate, that's fascinating. So what we need is social skills. All right, check. I think we need some language skills, some framing skills also help support that one. All right, I want to go back to, I want to make a comment about purpose, and then I want to spend a little bit of time on autonomy. One of the things about purpose is, if the company does have a general purpose statement that makes sense to people, that you can really get engaged in, that you can be proud of being a part of, and is genuinely lived, then that is a powerful component. But I believe purpose comes down to more of an individual or small group sense of purpose. So what is our group's, our team's contribution to the overall mission? What's our contribution? Why are we here? Why are you doing the job that you're doing? And how do you see the power of that job in accomplishing something bigger? Not just a stock price, but something else bigger. And it's that individual translation that I think we're missing. I think that's the secret sauce. Your view?
I completely agree. Like I say to my executives, and also write it in the book, one good test of this is if you ask people in the organization, tell me in your own words, what is the purpose of the organization? And if they cannot say it or just repeat whatever is written on the walls in big letters in the lobby, they can't live it, to your point. You kind of have to feel it, what it is, and need to express it in your own way. And you say it right. Sometimes that has to do with what the organization actually does, the mission, or what the group does. Sometimes it's like the division, the team that contributes to the overarching mission in a very particular way. And if they feel it, I think that's a very powerful way of doing so. I explain in the book is it was an interesting study or case about an accounting firm, KPMG. Now, I might be a little stereotypical here, but accounting is not a children's hospital. Let's leave it at that. So I thought, good luck finding the purpose. What they did is to really start to live and make it very personal what the purpose is. And the KPMG actually was involved in, the election of Nelson Mandela, the transition in South Africa. They actually counted the vote and verified the vote, and so on and so forth. So they started a campaign once. They called it 10,000 Stories, where you tell in your own view what is the impact that I having on my daily basis, and then creating a poster. And I think it started in somewhere in the summer, and they said, if we by Thanksgiving get 10,000 of those posters, everybody gets a day off, or even 2, as a motivator. It turns out within a week or 2, they already passed the 10,000, and by Thanksgiving they have 40,000. And people would then express it in their own view and in their own experience. What is the contribution that they're having? It was a very, very powerful campaign for individuals to actually feel their purpose. To your point, it has to be a very individual experience. And then they tracked, what effect that has on the retention, on whether it's a good place to work. And it all was a very powerful, very positive impact on those other metrics that the organization care about. But to your point, it needs to be something that I feel, that I can express in my own words, because otherwise, you don't feel it every single day. You have to actually go into the work and feel like what I'm doing right now, which is mopping the floor, quote unquote, has a much bigger purpose than just what I'm actually doing right now.
It's interesting. I have always believed that the way to make values that a company espouses, or your personal values, or in a brand statement about you personally or about the company, feel real, is to tell me the instances in which something happened that reinforces that value, a decision that was made or some variation on that theme. And I have done this with teams. Like, okay, you don't believe those values are real? Then tell me the stories. When was the last time you did this and it cost you, and so on? And it's those stories really become the persuasive element in the ways in which I don't relate to 40,000 stories, but I'll find 4 or 5 in there that say, oh yeah, me too. And I'll remember it and then act on it. So I love that example. I think it's fabulous.
Yeah. I love this. Yeah.
Let's shift to talk about autonomy, because you say autonomy and everybody wants a bit of autonomy. And I find that what most managers do is think that they need to delegate. And what they do with delegate is largely abandon. Here it's yours. Good luck. I hope it works. And then we end up sweeping back in and taking over and solving the problem and so on. So you really use the word trust, because I contend if people feel trusted, it's a huge boost. You take it a little more seriously. You want to work because you don't want to mess up the trust. And it's not how much freedom I have, it's how much trust you have in me.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I mean, on 2 aspects. One is the trust is critically important. You can't give autonomy if you don't trust, and trust is a very powerful motivator. And the second, what I also completely agree is, we often equate wrongly that giving autonomy being like stepping back. And then all the interactions are negative, because eventually stuff will go wrong. And then every time I interact with my team, I'm like, what the heck? Well, what were you thinking? Like, this, of course, is not what I actually meant, and so that's when you step back, all the interactions are going to be negative. So you actually have to be more engaged in order to empower and set up the empowerment for success. And trust without trust, you can't do that. And I agree that trust is a very, very powerful aspect. Now, if you think trust, in interpersonal relationships, outside in private, in our private spheres, it's also very powerful, but it's delicate. Once it's lost, it's not so easy to regain it. So we have to be very, very careful in making sure that we actually cherish trusting relationship and follow through with trust. Otherwise, to regain it, it's just really, really hard once it's lost.
Right. Especially in the work world. I mean, I think there are ways to regain the trust, and I think it can be done, but it, again, takes a lot of intentionality.
Right.
All right. Competence. We did this one really well, but I love this idea of, so you may think that matching the whole job to the just right skills is an impossible task, and may well be an impossible task with a big team. But giving people an opportunity to participate in something they want to learn something about and they can make a contribution on, just one thing, can be wonderful.
Absolutely. And I think it becomes more and more important. In a time where half-lives of skills are declining, everybody is worried, rightly so. If I don't learn something in the next month, maybe I'm falling behind. And they actually might. And so providing those opportunities are not only important for people being motivated, but might be actually mission critical for the organization to keep people engaged and up to speed. And that also then goes back a little bit, what are the skills we need going forward? And I think an important skill is learn to learn. Learn to learn new stuff is a really important skill going forward, because we constantly will do that in our careers, and careers are getting longer. When we live till 100 or 104, as your mother did, you have then a much longer career, and you actually need to pivot, because if you have a 60-year career, industries are come and gone. And so the days are over where we like going to school and then work and retire. I think we go to school and then we reskill and we upskill and we learn something new and we pivot, and that constantly have to do that. And organizations need to provide those opportunities for their employees, otherwise they're going to lose them.
Right. I agree. And I think we need to be much more thoughtful about HR professionals as well as companies on exactly what skills we do think we need. Learning to learn, yes, of course, but how am I then providing the training for that or the opportunities to develop those skills? And what are those skills? I think is really important. All right. I want to come back before we kind of close this conversation to your notion of treating employees like the new customers. Okay. I have to do a fun story. This is many years ago, a couple of decades. We won't go beyond that. That I was working with a senior financial group. And they had this crazy idea that we should treat employees like customers. So where we have a customer marketplace, we should have a talent marketplace. And thinking about the segmentation of employee, at any rate, it was a bigger deal than what we now currently think about in terms of talent marketplace. It was very much like turning the employee into a customer. So we'd have a talent relationship manager was one of their ideas instead of a customer relationship manager. So what do you think are the secret ingredients that we really need to consider in this employees as the new customers?
Yeah. I mean, I love that story, Wanda. And I think it was, I mean, probably still is revolutionary right now. So I like to share like a story or a quote from somebody who's really customer centric, and let's see if we would replace customer, whether that would still work. And I think it doesn't, but it should be. So Bezos, the founder and longtime CEO of Amazon, once said about his customers, he said roughly, what is beautiful about the customer? They're always dissatisfied. And so I can always learn to do better because they're so dissatisfied. Now, and that's what customer centricity is, figure out, listen to the customer, getting feedback, hearing what how they're disappointed and do better. Now, would we agree with the same statement that is like the beautiful thing about our employees is they're always dissatisfied. And so we can always learn and do better. I think we should, but we don't. We actually ask in many organizations, ask our employees once a year in annual engagement surveys what they think. Ignore it or don't put questions on it that we think like, oh, that could be a hot topic. Everybody knows about this, so nobody participates in the first place. And so it's not really employee-centric. And what we can learn from customers is like we listen to customer. We do innovation around customers, because we listen to them on what is going wrong. And I think that's just one of the tools that we can literally take one-on-one from customer centricity and apply it to employees. Listen to our employees, hear what is not going well in order to improve and do innovation in like how to actually make the work a better workplace and how to improve the employee experience as a result.
Fascinating. I love that. If we were willing to take employee feedback seriously, and obviously it's not every single individual, it's more people who are complaining about this thing and can we go about solving it or fixing it or whatever. I remember once, not too long ago, with a client doing an employee journey. So the employee life experience in this company, from entry and sets of expectations all the way through the experiences. And we did that by collecting employee stories and employee data and employee interviews and so on. When you step back and look at that employee journey, you see where we have problems. You see where we have problems in all the major gateways. You see ways in which there's a bias inside who we let through whatever gateways. It's a powerful tool. It works for customers and it also works for employees. So I love this challenge, Stephan. Yeah. Take everything we do that's great about customers and plug employee in there. Same process, same formula, same everything.
Exactly.
Wow, that would be a change. Great. It's an interesting one. We give our best customers to our best customer account managers. What if we gave our best employees our best managers?
Interesting.
That would be an interesting story.
Interesting idea.
Very interesting idea. All right, Stephan, what a wide-ranging, fun conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, as you can tell, but you're also speaking my language. So my guest today, Stephan Meier. He's at the Columbia School of Business. The book is called Employee Advantage, How Putting Workers First Helps Business Thrive. Stephan, if people want to reach out to you, where's the best place to find you?
I mean, I have a webpage on like stephanmeier.com or connecting on LinkedIn. I also have a monthly newsletter where I talk about the human-centric future of work. So those are kind of the channels.
Fantastic. Can I get that newsletter from your website, stephanmeier.com?
Yes.
All right.
And then there's a tab newsletter.
Okay, perfect. Love it.
Fun fact about the newsletter, it comes with, every newsletter comes with a self-made Lego stop-motion movie about work. So I make those little movies that are like related to the concepts.
All right, I'm going to go watch that just for the creativity. I'm signing up today. All right, as always, for our listeners, we would love to hear from you. So we have a brand new website called outofthecomfortzone.com. Go there, click on it, give us a comment, send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. And until next week, have fun getting out of your comfort zone.